Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Second Nature webinar. My name is Eric Howard, and I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships here at Second Nature. Many campus leaders are looking for ways to fulfill their institutional commitments to building a low-carbon economy. Today, we have nearly 100 registered participants for the webinar, and most of you are at campuses that have made leadership commitments with respect to carbon or climate or resilience. So thank you very much for joining us. One solution to work on climate is new types of contracts and agreements that can help reduce campus energy costs while also improving the on-campus infrastructure. The lessons from the program today are applicable to smaller institutions as well as large ones. So there's a wide array of people who are listening in. During the webinar, you'll be hearing about the experience from a peer, the head of finance at Wells College in upstate New York, and also from the CEO of Metrus Energy, which is a trusted service provider to businesses, colleges, and universities worldwide. I'll start with a quick overview and outline of today's program. Again, I'm Eric Howard. I'm giving the brief introduction. Then the president of Metris will provide some framing and background. And Robert will then talk about some of the challenges he faced as the CFO of a small campus, a campus that has a lot of older buildings and is located in a part of the country that's pretty cold in the wintertime. We already have some questions that were submitted by people when they registered. And we have time reserved for questions and answers. If at any time during the webinar you have a question, you can submit it through the chat box on your screen. And of course, you can follow up with any of the speakers at your convenience. Robert actually already told me that some of you have reached out to him before the program. Their contact information will all be on the final slide. Now, before I hand over the microphone to Bob and Robert, I want to give a quick thank you to the many universities, nonprofit, and corporate partners that we work with, including Metris, which is sponsoring today's program. A full list of our sponsors and partners is available on our website, secondnature.org. So, thank you very much. And now I hand over the microphone.
Great. Well, this is Bob Hinkle. Thanks, Eric, and Second Nature for hosting the webinar here today. In terms of some quick background on Metris, you can move forward one slide. We're a developer and financer and an owner of large-scale energy and water efficiency projects, and we finance and implement integrated multi-measure projects for colleges, universities, hospitals, and Fortune 500 firms across the country. We're partnering with a wide range of energy service companies, contractors, and lenders to implement those efficiency upgrades for our customers. And we're delivering energy efficiency as a service through these projects through our Efficiency Services Agreement, or ESA, which, as many of you may be familiar with, is similar to a traditional power purchase agreement or PPA for solar energy. Under our ESA, we fund 100% of the upfront cost of projects, and customers only pay Metris for realized savings once a project is constructed and fully operational. We presently operate ESA projects in 23 different states that are saving over 1 billion kilowatt hours of electricity. And one of those projects is in New York State, which, as you probably know, is where Wells College is located. So with that, maybe I'll hand it over to Robert to talk a little bit about the college and some initial background on the project that we're developing with them.
Thanks, Bob and Eric. I appreciate the time. For those of you who don't know, Wells College is located in upstate New York. We're a small, nationally recognized private liberal arts college located in the Finger Lakes region, more specifically along the east shore of Cayuga Lake. We actually just celebrated our 150th anniversary, so that sort of goes a little bit to Eric's comment a minute ago about the potential age of our campus, if you will. Another side note there, a number of years ago, the college made a conscious decision to create and maintain a Center for Sustainability and Environment, which really for us serves as the hub for programs that that engage the campus community in helping foster a more sustainable campus environment. If we go to the next slide, we want to talk a little bit about the requirements that the college had, at least for this type of project. It really started out as our facilities director, myself, our director of sustainability, looking for ways that we could address deferred maintenance issues while yet providing the college with energy savings. And of course, I would be remiss from my role if I didn't say also financial savings. But then also important to us was, at least for Wells College, we want to make sure that we minimize the amount of cash, or in this case, we wanted no upfront cash outlay from the college. We were really trying to look for a project and put a project in place that had some type of financing structure where a third party would provide that. And then ultimately the repayment, if you will, of that cash outlay would be made through potential savings. And in this case, I think the key word there is realized savings in the project. And I say that because as we looked at the project and we talked about potential types of savings, there were those that were and could be directly quantified and realized versus those that I would probably say would be more intangible. And so as we continue to have conversations with Train and Metris, we really wanted to make sure, at least especially from my standpoint, that the overall impact of the college was cash neutral, or obviously cash positive would be even better in terms of any impact to our budget. And then additionally, at least for Wells, I wanted to make sure that there was no impact to the college's balance sheet. And what I mean there is any potential impact. I wanted to make sure that there was no reflection of additional debt, if you will, on our balance sheet. Now, I'll actually talk a little bit about that more in some future slides, but from an overview, I think this gives a good idea of, from my standpoint, what we were looking for to move forward with this type of project. So I think at this point, Bob, you were going to talk a little bit about more specifically ESA, and then I can get more specific to our project here back in Aurora.
Yeah, no, so I can talk a little bit more about the mechanics of the ESA, and obviously a lot of what I'll go over here applies to Wells and what we have been doing on their campus. But in terms of the life cycle of the development of a project under an ESA, Metris is involved throughout all key phases of a project's life. And in the early development phase, we're working with our ESCO partners and customers to cast a pretty wide net in terms of looking at the types of efficiency measures that we can implement on campus. So we work to identify a suite of attractive upgrades that range from low cost, quick payback period type items like lighting and controls, to longer payback, more capital intensive measures like boiler, chiller upgrades or replacements. And we're in the role of performing the financial engineering to help design projects, implement them more from looking at what the technical scope would be and trying to meet economic and financial objectives of our customers. We're then, once a project is fully engineered and designed, we're funding 100% of the upfront cost of a project, and we're doing that in part with our own equity and in part with outside debt. During the construction, we are evaluating progress and paying the energy service company or contractor for their work on a progress payment type basis, but also simultaneously looking to see if we can identify any local utility incentives, any state level incentives, looking to really secure all possible incentives on that level that we can bring into the ESA, monetize them, both to improve the ESA terms for customers, but also to perhaps expand the scope of work to do more measures than might otherwise be possible absent those incentives. And Robert will talk a little bit about some of the local NYSERDA incentives that we received on our projects with them. Once a project moves into the operational phase, we then start to measure the realized savings, which really serve as the basis for customer payments under the ESA. During each year of the contract that we have with customers, we're measuring the ongoing savings from projects, so to quantify the actual reductions of electricity or natural gas or even water that are realized on our projects. And then customers pay Metris a services charge that's based on a cost per unit of energy savings. So we're setting that on a cost per kWh of electricity saved or a cost per therm of natural gas saved. And those ESA service charges are set at a level that should be below what a customer is currently paying their utility. So customers are cash flow positive from day one of projects. And the first payments that start to come in on a project are typically 3 months after the substantial completion of construction on a project. So payments are typically on a quarterly basis. And once a project is up and running, Metris is separately paying the contractor or ESCO on a project to perform some ongoing project monitoring and measurement of savings, but also selected maintenance on the project assets. And that level of maintenance service that we pay for is dependent on the type of needs that a given facility or a campus would require in terms of ongoing support, and also the types of assets there. So it's something that we can be flexible in terms of what type of maintenance is provided. Also, during the operational phase, we're looking to identify new efficiency measures. We might start out a project with a certain suite of efficiency upgrades, but then try to identify new savings over time where maybe there's some technology advances that could benefit a campus. So we have the ability to add in new efficiency measures over time, maybe 3, 4, 5 years into an arrangement. And those new savings are something that we will fund. And then once those new assets are up and running, they can just be incorporated into the original agreement, and the customer will pay the same original ESA rate per unit of savings. So it makes it much more of an ongoing energy efficiency procurement program than just a single point in time financing. Could probably move on to the next slide. So in terms of the contractual structure of our projects, there's really 2 key contracts that help govern each deal that we do. So there is the Efficiency Services Agreement, or ESA, that is a contract that Metrus enters directly into with the customer. The ESA has a standard set of terms and conditions, as well as a series of project-specific exhibits. And those exhibits will be where we'll detail the type of efficiency equipment that's installed, where it's located on campus. We'll describe how the efficiency measures will have savings calculated during the term. So there'll be calculations on how savings will be measured. And there, of course, will be the rate per unit of energy saved that the customer would be paying for realized savings during the term. The terms and conditions, again, look a lot like a solar PPA. So if your campus is one where you've done a third-party financed and owned solar PPA project, a lot of the terms and conditions in our ESA will look pretty familiar to you. In parallel and simultaneously, we sign a contract with an ESCO or an engineering contractor that's implementing the project, and that governs the construction and installation of the project. And then once the project is operational, there's typically some scopes of work with the contractor that'll cover ongoing monitoring and maintenance of the project throughout its life. So these 2 agreements are signed in parallel and have a lot of back-to-back elements to them. Could move to the next slide. In terms of the key benefits to colleges, you can really segment them into 2 buckets. On the financial side, and some of these I've covered a little bit, there's obviously no capital outlay by a college or a university, since Metris is funding 100% of the upfront cost of projects. So that can allow scarce CapEx dollars to go to other parts of campus where other work needs to be done. It also might allow us to fund some longer-term payback period projects than some campuses might want to use their own money for, since we can go out for longer terms. Since Metris, and Robert mentioned this a little bit, since Metris is a true third-party owner of the energy efficiency assets, we receive payments on a variable basis depending on performance, and have other key elements of control in the upfront design and then operation of the project, our ESA is something that's off balance sheet, so it should help preserve debt capacity for colleges. And the ESA rate itself is something that, certainly the way it's set, provides immediate positive cash flow for colleges, since we're setting the ESA rate at a level below their current utility rate. And there's also an element of de-risking projects from a financial perspective, since it is a true pay-for-performance arrangement. So if the project doesn't perform as well, payments go down to reflect that. On the operational side, we are going after deep energy retrofits, and that often means that we are replacing critical energy assets that can help improve the operational reliability and resiliency of campuses. So there's that key element of replacing older equipment with new equipment. And then once a project is up and running, we are monitoring the assets, paying for some added maintenance services that can help ensure that the assets are performing well, detect problems early on. So there's that element as well. And then there's the flexibility portion of this, where if over time, as Robert mentioned, we entered into a longer term agreement that was 14 years. So over time, there might be some new energy efficiency assets or measures that could be attractive to implement on the campus. And the ESA gives us the flexibility to do that should it be the right thing to do for the college. So it's more than a single point in time financing that gets fixed. It's more of an ongoing program where we're working with customers to help continuously achieve those sustainability and energy efficiency needs. Could move on to the next slide. In terms of our typical project, for the most part, our projects involve, I'd say, a half dozen or more different energy efficiency measures that we're combining and bundling into a single project. We have certainly done some single measure projects for customers, but by and large, we're looking at multi-measure integrated deep energy retrofit projects, going after both improvements to electric and thermal systems on campuses. And typical project size can vary, depends on the campus size, depends on the type of assets that are involved. Generally, our projects are north of $1 million. Probably an average deal is in the $2 to $5 million range, and we've done projects that are up and over 10 million. It really all depends on the situation and the type of project that needs to get done. We are bundling different assets together on our projects. Again, this can be taking different efficiency improvements, some with short payback periods, some with long payback periods, to come up with a good weighted average simple payback period that has the project fit into a term that works for the college. So generally we're financing projects that maybe have weighted average simple paybacks, if you look at all the measures together, in that 7 to 10 year range, sometimes 5 to 10 years. And those fit nicely into projects that have a 10 to 15 year ESA term, but certainly for college campuses, we can go out to 20 years if needed. The next slide here just shows a little bit of a visual of this integrated multi-measure approach. So within different buildings and across an entire campus, we are looking for a myriad of different efficiency upgrades. Really anything that you would think of in terms of a possible retrofit to a building, we can do. So interior and exterior lighting, controls is obviously a key element, and that can link to lighting, but also many different elements on the HVAC side. The last slide I'll talk about here before handing it back to Robert just puts the ESA in the context of some other potential financing options that are out there. So in different columns, you can see some other ways a project could get done: a traditional lease or a loan, PACE, property assessed clean energy, depending on where you are in the country, is a way to get some projects done. And then there's just traditional cash. The different rows then talk about attributes related to the financing, and maybe starting first at the bottom part of it, you can see that the terms of an ESA are comparable with other types of financing. We say 5 to 15 years here. I think we actually did do a 4-year deal, and our longest deal to date is 15 years, but we can go out longer. Cost of capital, we're not charging customers an interest rate or a fixed principal and interest payment, but cost of capital is always a question that comes up. So for most colleges that we would look at, the underlying cost of capital would probably be in the mid-5s to mid-6s, I would say. It depends. But that's the range of cost of capital. But usually when we have those discussions about cost of capital, we're also talking about the other attributes that go along with an ESA or efficiency as a service that make it different than just a traditional financing. And that can include items like that. It's a pay for performance arrangement where it's not a fixed principal and interest. There's the balance sheet considerations where the ESA is a service agreement where payments to Metris can be treated as an operating expense and not a capital expense. And of course, there's other ongoing services that get bundled in. During each year of the ESA agreement that we have with customers, we're also having Metris pay for and cover added ongoing services, be it on the monitoring or on the maintenance side, and having that ability to add in new measures over time. So it's, the ESA is certainly a financing solution, but it has comprehensive elements that are also important to bring into the discussions with customers, certainly in the institutional space where we work, but also in the Fortune 500 or private sector space as well. So with that, maybe I'll stop. And obviously, as Eric said, there's questions that we can dig into later on, but we'll have Eric talk a little bit more about Robert talk a little bit more about some of the specifics of the project.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I think I touched on earlier, but in conjunction with our agreement, our ESA agreement with Metris, then there's another party that's really involved with us as well, and that in our case that was Train. Train is a company that specializes in a number of these attributes. Is based out of the upstate region. And we had been working with them for quite some time on this, and so there's really a three-pronged party approach to this, if you will. And so really before we could get our hands or wrap our hands around the project that made sense for wells in particular, it required what I would call an energy audit that really needed to be done by Train and their experts. So they spent quite a bit of time on our campus, going through the bowels of some of the old buildings that we have here, and identified really from soup to nuts all of the potential items that might be ripe for this type of project. And so then once that overall energy audit was done, then it really was incumbent upon a representative from Wells, Train, and Metris to go through that and hone that down, if you will, to a project of a much more manageable size. You can imagine, as I indicated earlier, right, we just celebrated our 150th anniversary. So the average age, if you will, of our facilities on campus or our buildings, dates back, almost that far. And if I had to take an average of all our facilities over the span of the years that they've been built, we're probably talking still 70, 75 years old. And so it really wasn't unheard of, especially in our winter months here, for us to experience in some buildings where the heat comes on. It's very hard to regulate the heat, and so then you have employees that are getting uncomfortable, and so now you have people opening windows, right? And so we found ourselves in a position where we just were arguably wasting quite a bit of energy. So it was one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure we got our hands around this. So this slide really tries to attempt to break down the four main categories. Once that energy audit that I spoke about was completed, we then broke it down into four categories, one of which was a campus-wide lighting upgrade, right, which really amounted to changing a number or majority of the campus's light fixtures from fluorescent over to LED lighting. The next item was building automation system control enhancements. So really what we were doing here is trying to introduce modern technology in a number of our buildings in terms of automating the manner in which the building's HVAC controls are operated, even to the extent that then our facilities operation has the ability to log online and monitor overall temperature in a particular building and control that from a central point instead of really having to run right to a particular building if we're getting complaints that it's either too hot or too cold and fix it from there. So that was really key to the project. And then we talked about building envelope improvements. So this is anywhere from, and these would be things that we would even do in our own homes. Adding additional insulation in attic spaces to, new or greater weather stripping around windows and doors and things like that. And then finally, the fourth project or item within this project were what we would call steam trap upgrades. The college actually produces its own heat through a steam plant. And so we had a number of steam traps across campus that were anywhere from outdated to plugged and needed to be, cleaned out and then retrofitted to more modern technology. And so really after putting this together, you can see at the bottom there, we came up with a total project size of just over $2 million. And so then once we Metris ran those numbers, we ended up with a total ESA agreement that would go out to, I think it was either 13, 14 years at the most, that really from a useful life standpoint for many of these was probably right on par with a lot of the technology that was being put in here. So if we go to the next slide, really talk about some of the things that from the finance side we were doing, or I was doing behind the scenes. And what I don't list here, but I did want to talk about, was the real project timeline that Wells experienced. So we actually started having conversations with Train directly, back in January of 2016. And we ended up closing on this deal with Train and Metrus Energy in September of 2018. Now, I would dare say that, okay, so it took, 2.5 years. That is not, and I think Bob would agree with me, that is not how long these projects would normally take, but there was a lot of due diligence that I felt I needed to do on behalf of Wells College that really probably drag this out, if you will. So we throughout that whole time frame, I looked at all the different financing options that Bob had mentioned in one of his earlier slides, right? Anywhere from, cash outlay and we just financed the whole thing, to leasing versus a PACE financed project. And then finally we were introduced to the ESA solution that Metris was offering. And not having much experience with that, I wanted to make sure that, from a legal standpoint, from our independent auditor standpoint, that was going to not have negative impact that we might not find out about until, maybe even after our audited financials were done at the end of the fiscal year. And then because the college actually has a small amount of outstanding debt, I also wanted to make sure that this did not trigger any additional debt covenants that are in place with our outstanding debt. So I brought our bank in on discussions on this as well. To the extent that we actually had a number of conference calls with our auditors on the line, with Metris on the line, with our bank on the line, and obviously the college on the line, and talked through and made sure everybody understood really how this worked. And I got some solid assurances that this would not impact the college's balance sheet, so it wouldn't be listed as additional debt on our financial statements. that the bank had it in their notes that, you know, when they did their annual review of college performance, that they would not at a later date trigger or feel that this triggered any financial covenants. So that was another key point, at least from my standpoint. And that really took quite a while for all the players to get comfortable with, but I would dare say it was definitely well worth the exercise. And then one of the other key aspects of this particular project, given our region, right, we were able to take advantage of NYSERDA's RTEM promotion, and we've also received support through their Rev Campus Challenge program. That was actually one of the key drivers because that ultimately influenced the overall finance projections that Metris was putting together. And what I really liked about this particular project and working directly with Train is because of their experience in this area and their knowledge of NYSERDA, they actually were act as our representatives to NYSERDA, and we're able to really streamline the application process and ensuring that we were able to take advantage of all the opportunities that NYSERDA had available. So you want to make sure if you have that option to keep that in mind as well. I believe that is the last slide. If you want to hit, yep, okay. So if there's questions out there, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I also know that our contact information will be put there. If you've got specific questions to your particular campus, I'd be more than happy to discuss that with you individually if that works as well. But this time, I guess, Eric, I would turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I do already have a couple of questions that have come in. And the first one actually relates very much to what you were just talking about. You mentioned getting agreement and okays from your bank and other sort of outside stakeholders. Can you talk a little about the inside stakeholders? Did you just make this decision yourself, or what was the role of the president, or the board, or the trustees, and how did you inform them and get them involved through this 2-year process?
Very good point. Thanks. That's a good question. So throughout our due diligence process internally, I myself and our director of facilities were in constant contact and keeping our president informed of what we were working towards. And throughout the process, when we had regular, in my case, finance committee meetings, and then ultimately full board meetings, we kept them apprised of the project that we were working towards. And then ultimately, once I had all of the necessary answers that to the questions that not only I wanted answered, so these are the ones and part of the reason why I addressed them with our attorney, with our outside auditors and our bank, was because I expected our board of directors to ask the same thing, or our board of trustees. And so when it came to that point, we did actually hold a special meeting with our board of trustees where we invited both members of Metris and Train to do an education piece on the ESA agreements and have each of them talk about the benefits of the project and how this would really totally impact the college in a positive manner. And then I was able to provide the assurance that, everything that Bob and Representative Train spoke about, that I had vetted and would actually hold true in terms of no impact to our balance sheet and how the repayment would actually work. I hope that answers the question. Great. That was a good one.
That was good. Yeah, thank you. Now, I'm also aware that the question was related to there might be efficiency upgrades that are not really directly related to energy consumption. And so how might campuses fund those types of efficiency upgrades if it's not an energy project?
Yeah, I guess this is Bob. I can take that one. So yes, we can do projects that go beyond energy. Predominantly what we do is energy efficiency, but certainly if there's water efficiency upgrades, that's something that we can do. in many ways, if you take a step back, what an ESA involves is a cost avoidance type agreement. So if there's some utility or service that the upgrade of equipment can help avoid, that's something that we can typically try and capture in. And water's a great example. There's been some other entities we've dealt with for some hospitals looking at avoided sewer charges and other elements related to work or construction that was done as part of projects. So those are all things that we can look at and try to quantify and measure. And then, of course, there's benefits that go beyond some of the things that we charge for, increased comfort of students or other occupants of buildings. Those are all key factors and why people do these projects. But typically we're looking for the energy savings to help pay for those upgrades, but can certainly go beyond that and be collaborative and creative, to meet customers' needs.
Okay. I have a couple other questions that are showing up here. The first is, how are savings determined when there might be other projects happening at the same time as the ones that are covered under this particular agreement?
Robert, I can take that one.
If you want to start that, and then.
Yeah, please. So in terms of how we look at it, really in some ways the question is how are we measuring and verifying savings? And it gets very specific to the upgrades that we're financing and implementing. So I often like to think about it almost in a way of we'd be throwing a blanket around the assets that we'd be financing on a campus and measuring and evaluating the performance of that specific equipment. So in the schedules, the exhibits to the ESA, there will be a particular one that will detail all the assumptions and ongoing calculations of the energy savings for each specific piece of equipment. So what that means is that we're isolating the assets and evaluating the savings such that if something else is going on campus, let's say there's maybe a behavioral program or campaign that has students helping save energy that will ultimately reduce the college's utility bill, we're not capturing or benefiting from that as a project. So it's really isolating what we're financing and implementing and then measuring that specific equipment to insulate, really all parties from any changes going on outside.
Okay, there are
also. And I could just add, Eric, if it makes sense, that I know from our standpoint, throughout the whole energy audit that I spoke of, right, there were constant conversations between the college and Train, who performed the energy audit, around things that were upcoming that we had planned to do, and then if there was any overlap, if you will, between projects that arguably would then get identified for this. To be wrapped under the ESA agreement versus things we were going to do on our own. Those were handled through those conversations, and then ultimately it is, as Bob mentioned, the ESA agreement has a very, very detailed number of exhibits that really outline all of this. So it helps to address those exact questions as you continue to progress through this process.
Okay. Are these types of ESA agreements available in all states nationwide? And how are these kinds of agreements different from PACE-financed projects? You did mention PACE as well as another option, which I think are not available in all states in the nation at this point.
Right. Yeah. So good question. And in terms of availability of ESAs, it's anywhere in the U.S. So no restrictions there. Looking at PACE specifically, as you mentioned, PACE is something where there needs to be really local, not just state-enabled legislation in order to have someone be able to implement a project under PACE. So there it is more state or city-by-city type of review that would need to be done. And I guess there's a couple key differences. So under an ESA and PACE, there's similarities in terms of the types of assets that can be financed. Both can include a wide range of clean energy efficiency upgrades. You'll see similar terms in terms of the length of an agreement. Where the main difference is, PACE by definition, has the payments coming back from a customer to be paid through a property tax bill. So it really gets, payments are attached to a specific building or customer or facilities property tax payments. And also by virtue of the legislation, the PACE payments need to be fixed and not variable for a term. So in many ways, what you're doing under PACE is you're almost having a fixed lease type payment where it's almost a principal and interest type repayment that doesn't go up or down based on the actual performance of a project. And so therefore, it's something that more typically sits on the balance sheet of the customer. So it's an on-balance sheet financing, doesn't have variability of payments, and often doesn't include some of these ongoing services. But depending on the region you're in, it can be a way to get some longer-term infrastructure upgrades done that certainly can go beyond energy. I know in my home state, California, there has been some PACE projects done with hospitals, and a lot of the driving work there was more for seismic upgrades and retrofits. So it can be a pretty expansive type of financing solution depending on the upgrades that you need.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers the question.
So the variability of payments over time, that also makes it easier for you to add new projects into the agreement. If 2 or 3 or 5
Correct.
years into the agreement, you suddenly say, oh, we noticed this thing suddenly broke, or something else happened and you want to add a new project to the overall terms of the ESA.
Yeah, no, that's right. There's the ability to do those type of changes at all points during the agreement term under an ESA.
Okay. In terms of this particular one that you have with Wells, maybe Robert from Wells, when did it actually begin? And have you noticed anything wonderful that you can report publicly?
Well, so actually, we actually closed on the agreement in September of 2018, and so given the scope of a number of the elements of the project, and I guess I did not mention this. Wells College is a residential campus, right? So we wanted to make sure that any project work did not impact the student experience while they were here, right? So we closed on September of 2018. The first time that Train could even get on campus to start to impact certain buildings, and wasn't until our holiday break, right? So now we're talking December timeframe, and then once graduation occurred, they hit this campus full force. So we are actually still in the midst of having Train is still on this campus doing a lot of the work that we've talked about. So I haven't even gotten through that point yet to really, I guess, answer the ultimate question, which is, have we seen or can we confirm some of the initial savings, and how is that working? So I guess I'd either say stay tuned or let's have a conversation in a few months so I can properly answer that.
Okay. Are there only certain types of technologies that could be financed by an ESA? Or can it really cover all sorts of different things? And if you already have equipment from like Train, how does that get involved and incorporated?
Okay. Well, in terms of there are no limitations on technologies. The ESA really is an open platform to finance a whole range of efficiency upgrades. So no set limitations there. And if you look at our current portfolio of projects, there's probably over 30 different types of efficiency upgrades that we've done, and within that, probably 3 times that in terms of different manufacturers or brands of equipment in there. So again, we're agnostic to the type of technology and just look to have something that generates savings. And if a customer has existing systems, be it from Train or other companies out there, that's something we can certainly build on, augment, repair, replace, or add on to that as appropriate.
Okay. Are there reasons why a campus might want to use or not use certain state incentives that might be available? Because again, the state provides all sorts of incentive, whether it be New York State or other states around the country sometimes provide incentives for energy efficiency. And there are times when a business or a campus is also a business might want to use those types of incentives, but there are also instances where a decision is made not to use a state incentive. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Robert, would you like me to take a first pass at that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think from a financial perspective, I think unless there's added costs that go along with taking that incentive, that's something that we would always look to try to do to try to improve the economics on a project. I mean, I have seen some programs where maybe there's some ongoing reporting obligations that potentially one might want to consider from a cost or perhaps confidentiality perspective. But in general, we haven't, in the 10 years that we've been doing work and implementing ESAs, we haven't had an instance where we've elected, or I should say the customers elected not to have us pursue an incentive.
And I guess I can just add or speak more specifically in our instance. I don't remember the conversation ever being, would we not want to take advantage of the NYSERDA incentives, but it was more around, do we want to build it into the financial model that would ultimately flow into the agreement, meaning is it part of the agreement, or do we work towards receiving those incentives outside of the agreement? And so then it flows back to the college directly. Those are really more of the conversations, as opposed to do we just not take advantage of it? And predominantly or primarily because there were no other strings attached, if you will, right? All of the requirements to receive those incentives were being met by the project already. So I can't think of any reason why you wouldn't either, but not to say there isn't.
Yeah. And I think there are also sometimes incentives at the municipal level in addition to the state level or even the federal level, right?
Sure.
Okay. We're getting close to the end time for our webinar. Actually, it just occurs to me I should show you the last slide, which has everyone's contact details. So there you have everyone's names and phone numbers and email addresses. And all three of us are more than willing to follow up and help anybody with questions that they may have. And I'll also remind you that your friends and colleagues will be able to listen to this webinar online at a future date. The links for our webinars are there. Also, there's a link you'll see for our summit. The Higher Ed Climate Leadership Summit is an event every February. The last 3 summits were all held in Arizona. And this coming February, we're taking it to the Southeast. We'll be down in Atlanta, Georgia at the end of February. A new opportunity to develop relationships, support peer-to-peer learning. So if you haven't finished putting together your budget for the next fiscal year, be sure to put in a little money in the budget so that you can visit and participate in the upcoming Higher Ed Climate Leadership Summit. In closing, on behalf of Tim Carter, who is Second Nature's president, and the rest of the Second Nature team here in Boston, and our staff who are offsite around the country, we wish you the best for the summer. We do have a few more minutes, and so if Bob or Robert have any closing comments that they would like to make, I'm happy to pass the microphone back to each of you.
You know, there was one of the questions that talked about, and I took it as almost a phasing approach, and I would just add that that was actually a conversation that we did have internally and with our board that, you know, again, as our energy audit that we did identified, you know, such a a larger amount of potential projects that we really viewed this as a possibility for a number of phased approaches, meaning add-ons to the current ESA agreement with Metris, so that then we could start to tackle that next layer of potential projects. So I guess all to say that we really looked at that to make sure that that was feasible, so that we weren't pigeonholing ourselves into just the list of projects that were identified for this first group. So that was a good question.
And Bob Hinkle?
Yeah, I would just, obviously thanks again to you, Eric, for setting this up and for everyone's time. And Robert, mentioned that through some of the different discussions we had with the college, we got together with different stakeholders and explained the nuts and bolts of an ESA agreement, be it from the implementation technical side, the financial or accounting side, or the legal side. And we have lots of ready descriptions for that, and would welcome any conversations with campuses that are looking to tackle whatever sustainability or energy efficiency project on campus that they have in mind.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. I'll remind you all that Second Nature is based in Boston, and so if you're heading to Boston for business or vacation or pleasure, please give us a call. Our office is right next to City Hall in the center of the town. And I'm sure the folks at Wells College would love to have you stop by and visit them if you're heading to upstate New York on a wine tour or visiting the Finger Lakes region. So
there you go. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Right. Thanks so much. And I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.